Monday afternoon to you. It's 4 o'clock time for Sports4CLE. Thanks for joining us. A little later in the show, we'll talk about the Cavs, winners in Game 7. They move on to face the Celtics. Guardians call up one of their top prospects, Kyle Manzardo. He is in the lineup tonight. We begin, though, by talking Browns. DeShaun Watson on the podcast, QB Unplugged with Quincy Avery, his quarterback coach, talking about his rehab and getting ready to be able to play Week 1.
I'm at a great space. You know what I'm saying? Mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. Like, I don't feel like I'm rushing. I don't feel like I'm behind. I'm like where I need to be overall, just like football-wise and just everything. With my surgery, coming back, rehabbing, and it's just like, it's one of those deals where I feel like I'm back in like 2017, 18. You know what I'm saying? Where we start from ground up, fundamentals and everything. I think over the past couple years, especially since I got traded, we were trying to speed up everything. All right, how can we catch up? How can we catch up? All right, we need to do this. And it's a lot coming up as a one. Now it's like, all right, cool. Let's sit back, add a little downtime. All right, let's wrap it up as fast as possible when we need to. And I think that's where it's been.
With that, let's welcome in Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Tim, it's kind of interesting. It sounds good. Let's see if that can translate once he gets back onto the field.
I mean, when DeShaun Watson came off the last season-ending injury, way back when he tore his ACL in his rookie season, he came back in 2018, had a great season, got the Texans into the playoffs. So, obviously, if you're the Browns, you would take that kind of year from DeShaun Watson. So it's interesting to see him kind of have that mentality where he's kind of, trying to be a little more calm and going back to, the beginning of his career. He's trying to pick things up as opposed to what he was talking about with the last 2 years where it felt like everything was going kind of fast for him. And I think there were times, especially in 2022, where things looked fast. It looked like last season it was starting to slow down for him again, that, he was looking like himself again, maybe not at the peak form that we've seen in the past, but, he kind of looked more like, his composure was better outside of the Pittsburgh game. His confidence was there. And you saw, the Titans, the Cardinals, and especially the second half of the Ravens game, that looked more like the true DeShaun Watson. And, of course, the question is going to be how he comes back from this surgery, because we really haven't ever seen an NFL quarterback try to do this. So, ultimately, I think we do kind of have to couch some expectations a little bit early just to kind of see how he comes back, for him to take a couple of hits with his shoulder before we can really kind of judge where he's at.
Yeah, he sounds like he's much more at ease, but we'll see. All right, this from the Bleacher Report, defensive power rankings after the NFL draft. They go Browns number 1, Jets were 2, Cowboys were 3. Why they're ranked here? Browns were the top defense in EPA per play, yards allowed per play, and was the primary reason the Browns made the playoffs with Joe Flacco, that being the defense. Offseason has done nothing to cause doubt that they'll be great again. The unit under Jim Schwartz for the second season, so there should be more familiarity with the system. How they can improve. Had the worst touchdown rate in the red zone. Teams scored on 71.1% of the trips inside the 20. That was in part because the Browns were just average when stopping the run. They made some personnel adjustments in the offseason, bringing in Devin Bush, Jordan Hicks, Quentin Jefferson, who could all help. They also took Michael Hall Jr., another defensive tackle. So on paper, defense looks better, I think.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you get all these guys back, you would assume healthy, going into the season. Some of these younger guys are a year older. Myles Garrett's a year older, more experienced. Grant Delpit's another year experienced. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, Martin Emerson, Denzel Ward, you name it. Just familiarity helps, I think, when it comes to this defense. Although I do think you have to always be changing things. Kevin Stefanski, I think, said something earlier in the offseason about the idea of always making sure you're evolving. And I think that's going to be important for this Browns defense to continue to evolve. And, they mentioned the issues in the run game, 19th in the NFL in rushing yards allowed per attempt at 4.3, so they obviously got to be better there. We'll see how, Jordan Hicks and Devin Bush, as veteran presences, hold up there. Obviously, they lost Sione Takitaki, and they really added to the defensive tackle group, like you said, with Quinn Jefferson and Michael Hall Jr. Who I think, as a rookie, will have more of an impact on passing plays than running plays. But even if they're not the number 1 defense in the NFL, again, the Browns should certainly still be one of the best because they have so many of their guys back.
All right, this also from the Bleacher Report. Free agents the Browns should pursue after the NFL draft. Number one on the list, they go Shaquille Leonard. Browns could benefit from adding a veteran linebacker to back up JOK and Jordan Hicks. After all, the Browns' front seven usually experiences more wear and tear than other units because of the run-heavy styles in the AFC North. Number two, another linebacker, Zach Cunningham. Only 30, owns 5 seasons with at least 90 tackles, 4 campaigns with at least 5 TFLs. One-year deal for Leonard or Cunningham would be good business for the Browns as they look to shore up every position on the depth chart before training camp. Number 3, tight end. Injuries ravaged his career over the last few seasons with the Commanders. If he's healthy, he could be a decent second or third option for the Browns offense across the middle. If you explain to me as a one-year deal with Leonard and Cunningham and it doesn't cost much, I'm okay with it. I don't know that the Browns are looking to bring in a veteran linebacker. They probably need a veteran tight end.
Yeah, I would think of the three, going the tight end route would be the most interesting. And I do like Logan Thomas as a nice backup piece of the tight end. He's had a couple nice seasons, had almost 700 yards his first year in Washington way back in 2020. Last year, almost 500 yards. So he's had nice, solid production over the last couple of seasons in Washington, which has not had real good quarterback play since Kirk Cousins left early a few years ago. Of the two linebackers, though, if I were to pick one of them, I would personally lean more towards Zach Cunningham. I think he hadn't been as good throughout his career as Shaq Leonard, I should say, but I think right now I would take him over Shaq Leonard. He seems like he's kind of taken a step back the last couple seasons, just hasn't been the same guy who he was when, he won Defensive Rookie of the Year way back in the day. He was a four-time Pro Bowler, 3-time All-Pro, and he was obviously great at the beginning of his career with the Colts, but hadn't quite been the same. Whereas Cunningham, I think he hasn't been as elite, but he seems just a nice, sturdy, solid veteran linebacker who's really good, who's racked up a lot of tackles. He had 164 as a career high, of course, former teammate of DeShaun Watson, so that can't hurt either. Just another solid veteran piece, and I think, that article mentioned maybe his value's a bit depreciated after the Eagles collapse. So maybe you bring in a guy like that, he's maybe a little more motivated to prove that, he's still got plenty left in the tank and that what happened at the end of the season in Philadelphia wasn't his fault.
All right, before we go to break, this is the NFL ranks in supporting castrating. So it's in terms of average team PFF rush, receiving, pass blocking, and run blocking grades, everything except passing over the past 5 seasons. 49ers are first, Ravens second, Eagles third, Packers are fourth, Chiefs are fifth, Cowboys sixth, and the Browns are seventh. So a little bit of frame of reference. In 2019, the Browns were 14th. 2020, they were first. 21, they were 8th. 22, they were 6th. Last year, they were 24th. This year they check in at 7th. So again, it's kind of one of those analytical measuring sticks, and the Browns kind of moving up.
Yeah, and obviously, you look at those 5 years, I think 2023 obviously sticks out as the outlier, and it's easy to see why, because, the Browns lost their top 3 offensive tackles, and outside of, a couple games after the bye week with Nick Chubb out for the season, the team really struggled to run the football, so you can kind of see why those numbers really took a hit, because just so much was decimated in the running game. And it shows kind of just what Joe Flacco meant to this team in the final handful of games he played. Just the fact that he overcame so much just to get this team into the playoffs, it's significant. But what it shows over the 5-year timeline as well, that the Browns have done a really good job of adding pieces onto this football team. And, obviously since 0-16, it seems like they've obviously done a much better job bringing good pieces in. Obviously that 2018 draft has been so huge for them, with Denzel Ward and Nick Chubb becoming stars at their respective positions. And even, in the Andrew Berry era, 2029, he just kept adding solid players across the board. Still looking maybe for that all-pro to kind of pop as far as one of his draft picks, but he's just added some good quality pieces. And it's the product of what you see right now, which is one of the more talented rosters in football. Obviously, that bore out last year with a playoff run. We'll see how it goes if the Browns get healthier quarterback play going forward.
Tim Bielik and I are going to step aside, take a quick timeout. Other side of the break, we will continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. Stay with us.
Play Maximum Millions and $2 million Ultimate Cash from the Ohio Lottery, and you may never look at scratch-offs the same way again.
We continue talking Browns with Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer and cleveland.com. This from Pro Football Network. Off-season grades for each and every AFC team. For the Browns, they give them a C+. Browns let a few key players walk in free agency. They made up for it by addressing top needs in the draft. There isn't much to complain about, as Cleveland still has a loaded roster that hasn't seen much change since the end of the season. I don't know. C+ is kind of low. You went out and you got Jerry Jeudy. You drafted Michael Hall Jr. Those are kind of two of the bigger areas where you've made additions that I thought were weaknesses.
Yeah, and when you look at what they've had in the offseason, obviously the biggest addition is Jerry Jeudy, because he's a veteran, because he's got 4 years of NFL experience. You signed him to a 3-year extension, before he takes a snap in a Cleveland Browns uniform, even in practice. So I think with the grade, it kind of, for me and kind of what I'm seeing out of the draft grades in particular, it kind of comes down to just they just didn't have a lot of high-value assets, not a lot of cap space to play with. They focus more on just kind of bringing the band back together in some ways. Obviously, adding Jerry Jeudy was a smart move, but they really didn't make too many big outside additions outside of him and Jameis Winston. And then the draft, obviously not having a pick in the top 50 is going to hurt the draft grade, because there's just not not as many good players that are going to be available to you. So, I mean, I would give them better than a C+. I would say like a B+. It's not the flashiest offseason, but it's, a solid offseason. We're just trying to continue adding to the team. But the biggest thing is guys getting healthy and guys being back next season. Yeah,
the other thing, you added Quentin Jefferson. That's a pretty decent upgrade at defensive tackle. You also added Jordan Hicks, which is an upgrade on the second level, and you've got younger guys you're developing. So I get it. It's not sexy, but they did improve that roster. This from the Bleacher Report. Every team's undrafted free agent most likely to make the team. For the Browns, they go offensive guard Javion Cohn, while PFF credits him with allowing a sack. Cohn told Bleacher Report he didn't allow a QB takedown in any of his 1,332 pass-blocking snaps during his 4 years in college, and the sack was wrongly credited to him. Cleveland touts one of the NFL's top starting guard tandems, but depth is annually tested. Cohn's blend of athleticism and Power 5 experience could move the needle for Kevin Stefanski. Again, it's not a flashy position guard. Again, that's a really good undrafted rookie free agent signing.
Yeah, I mean, this was a guy that, for me, looked like he should have been drafted, at least, maybe in the 6th, 7th round, just because he has so much sheer power, and he's a younger guard than most of the guys that got drafted in the final 2 rounds of this draft. So with Cohen, I think as much as, maybe this case with all these UDFAs, it's going to be hard to crack this roster just because it's so deep across the board. There's so many great players at every position that it's just going to be hard to really pop and find a roster spot for yourself unless you really go out and dominate, in mini camp, OTA, mandatory mini camp, and then obviously training camp of the preseason games. You got to play really well. And also with Cohen, you got another rookie out there in Zach Zinter, their 3rd round pick, who's pretty much who's gonna make the team. You imagine he's gonna be a starter going forward. So already that's one depth guard spot filled behind Joel Bitonio and Wyatt Teller. So the question is, how many more offensive linemen are the Browns going to take into the regular season? Obviously, with 53 roster spots, you can only bring in so many linemen. Maybe he's a guy that, certainly can make a case to stick around in the practice squad. You keep developing developing behind the scenes. And he's a young guy, so there's still a lot of time and a lot of growth still with him, but he's got a lot of natural physical tools that make him very interesting.
All right, before I let you go, NFL draft class ranked by RAS, so relative athletic scores. The Commanders were 1, the Eagles were 2nd, and you see the Steelers were 3rd. You notice a lot of skill position guys in those first 3. The Browns were ranked 27th, so bottom bottom 5th of the draft. in athleticism, so the RAS scores. It's kind of interesting because you do know, we know from history that that is an area that Andrew Berry in the front office measures. I would say they didn't have as many draft picks, and they drafted a lot of linemen, so those scores are a little bit lower than if you're drafting wide receivers and cornerbacks.
Right. I think it's also just a product of where they were picking by and large. Again, 4 picks outside the top 150, and naturally in any draft, high-end athletes are going to go towards the top. And like I said, no picks in the top 50. So when you don't have that many picks, obviously some of those elite athletes are going to go off the board. So you're just kind of hoping guys fall to you. I think another thing that kind of hurt it was, guys either not testing as well as they could have, or obviously in the case of Zach Zinter, he didn't test because he was recovering from the broken tibia and fibula that he suffered in the Ohio State game. And of course, you got Jamari Thrash, who tested solidly, but it felt like he could have tested better, because when you watch him on his highlight film, he looks faster on the field than, of 40 in the mid 4.4s. So it feels like he maybe could have been a little faster. That said, again, like I said, just maybe a product of the guys who were available to them and where they had to pick. And you would imagine with largely a full complement of picks next year, you got the first, your second, and third, along with now I believe 3 6th-round picks. Now you have some extra draft capital to work with, and maybe then you have a chance to get some more intriguing athletes, especially higher up the board in the first round.
Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. As always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Tim.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Have a good day.
Tim Bielik, make sure you check him out. Always really good stuff. Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. We're just upside. Take a quick time out. We turn our attention to the Cavaliers. They defeated the Magic in Game 7. Up next, Boston Celtics. Sam Amico from hoopswire.com and I talking Cavs when we return.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
Sports4CLE continues. We turn our attention to the Cavaliers, who came from behind and won Game 7 to advance to the second round of the NBA playoffs. Take a look at this note. Most points in Games 6 and 7 of a series. 90 by Allen Iverson against the Bucks back in 2001 Conference Finals. Donovan Mitchell had 89 against the Magic this series, more than Jimmy Butler in the 2022 Conference Finals, more than Dominique Wilkins in the 88 semifinals, and more than LeBron James in the 2018 Conference Finals. That's how good Donovan Mitchell was in Game 6 and 7. Let's welcome in Sam Amico from hoopswire.com. Sam, you've seen a lot of basketball. What about the way Donovan Mitchell played in those 2 potential closeout games for the Cavs?
Yeah, that's just called putting the team on your back and carrying them. He was, especially in that Game 6, which obviously didn't work out in the Cavs' favor. You could see that Donovan Mitchell was, we're not losing this game. Well, unfortunately, he didn't get much help that game. Game 7 turned out differently, and you tend to get better help at home, right? Darius Garland missed the baseline 3, the corner 3. Mitchell got the ball back to him after a Max Strus rebound. Garland knocks it down. Karis LeVert finally comes to life after struggling the first 6 games in this series. And offer some help. Evan Mobley struggled mightily in Game 7, but hit a big shot when he needed to. Same thing with Max Strus. So that was the difference, really, between Game 6 and Game 7 was, you had these other guys contribute. As far as Donovan Mitchell, sometimes that's what it takes. It takes 89 points in 2 games. Fortunately, the Cavs have somebody who's capable of doing that. So, just what a masterful individual showing he gave in those last 2 games when the Cavs absolutely had to have one. And work's probably not done yet. Still got work to do.
Yeah, so 18 points was the deficit in the first half, and that 18-point come-from-behind victory, the largest comeback in a Game 7 since 1997 and 98. That was 17 points by Portland against Denver. Yeah, Sam, it looked, did you think there was any way they were coming back when they were down 18? I was like, this just isn't going to happen.
Yeah, you see that kind of stuff during the regular season when teams come back from 18, 20 points. Not obviously, we don't see it much in the playoffs just by that stat alone. But I think that, I was a little bit, when I was sitting there at the game watching that, I thought, boy, I don't know. Normally 12, 14 points, you think, okay, but 18, that's a big ask. So I had my doubts. And I think, Donovan Mitchell said after the game that because it was earlier in the game, in the first half, that they never wavered. And really, you came out in the third quarter and really put the clamps down defensively, which is what changed the course of the game. And, the Magic got a little bit rattled by that, started throwing the ball out of bounds to nobody, missing a lot of those jumpers and those good looks that they were getting in the first half. They didn't keep falling. And that's where I thought the Cavs could chip away, is eventually the Magic are going to start missing these shots on the road. Sure enough, that's what happened in the second half. And, Donovan Mitchell kind of did the rest.
So the question becomes Jared Allen. Didn't play again. You hear he's having trouble lifting his hands above his head without pain. That's a pretty critical part of what he does. So that's got to get corrected. And you would think if he can't do it in a Game 7, they got to come back and play tomorrow. I would imagine he's not going to be there Game 1.
Yeah, it'd be tough to be magically healed overnight, which is what this would be, since he didn't play in 6 or 7, or actually Game 5. And yeah, I mean, injured ribs are no joke. As you just said, Dave, they've made it clear he can't lift his arms up over the head. You think about so many things that you use your core for, jumping to block shots, especially when you're a big man. You're going to take more elbows during the playoffs. That's just the way it goes. So very limited if he is able to play, I would imagine. And, you hope if it's just bruised ribs as opposed to a fracture, you would hope that he could go eventually in this series, sooner rather than later, like maybe, another week. You give him till Saturday. But, as far as the Cavs are concerned, they're calling it day to day, and it sounds like it's very much up in the air for Game 1. So, that's a promising sign, because Boston, obviously, they don't have their key big guy in Kristaps Porzingis, who has an injury and could miss the whole series. So it'd be nice to get Allen back, because you're going to need that rim protection against guys like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. But if he's too injured to offer that, then, yeah, no sense in rushing him back.
All right, so this is from ESPN.com. Each NBA playoff team's strength and weakness. Now for the Celtics, as we look ahead, strength, depth behind their star duo, so that's Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And they say specifically Derek White. Weakness, rim protection without Porzingis. You look at the Cavs, they say strength is their isolation defense. Weakness is playing on the road. Yeah, the road. If you can't beat the Magic, if you can't make the Magic's game, those games competitive, you're gonna be in trouble in the Boston Gardens.
Right, you've got to find. Donovan Mitchell has said they've got to play way better than they did against Orlando, and they know that. They're still kind of hoping for a complete game, complete effort, where everything comes together, and they haven't had that really since probably maybe once or twice since the All-Star break. So, now your back's up against it. Can you put together that kind of complete game where defensively you're as strong as you've been all season, which that is right. That's individual defense has been their strength all year, as well as some team defense. But you're going to have to do that, and you're going to have to make shots. They didn't make shots against Orlando, even in Game 7. You were looking whatever they started from 3, just weren't falling down. Then Sam Merrill came in, kind of gave them a boost by hitting 2 quick threes, and all of a sudden, the 18-point lead is down to 10 at halftime. You have new life. So but that started with their defense, and then they continued that defense again in the second half. But yeah, they'll have to be better if they're going to get a road win, which you have to do to get out of this series. They're going to have to put together one of those games like they did in January, and when they won 17 of 18, and just everything came together for a stretch there. And you know what? The bright side is, if you put together one of those games, then you realize what you did and how you went about it, and then you feel confident to put another, and that's what leads to playoff upsets in a 7-game series. Is we found something here that's working, and now it's going to work every time. So that's really their mission. But yeah, you've got to find some serious resolve to win a road game and play a lot better than you did on the road against Orlando.
It's a little different challenge, and obviously the Celtics are the best team in basketball, but you don't have the 6'10", 6'11", physical presence kind of guys that caused a lot of problems for the Cavs. It's a different set of problems with the Celtics.
Yeah, Boston's physical play all stems from their backcourt. Drew Holiday and Derek White are very physical defenders. They're very talented defenders. Now, the good news is the Cavs experienced that a little bit already with Jalen Suggs and Gary Harris in Orlando, because those those players are also very physical defenders. White and Drew Holiday from the Celtics are both excellent defenders. They're not as good at defenders as Jalen Suggs. He may be the best backcourt defender in the NBA. So, the Cavs survived that, but now they're going to get 2 guys that, with Derek White especially, not only is really good defensively, but he's capable of erupting offensively. So that's where, this is where the series is going to be different. Then, of course, Orlando rolls out, 4, 6, 11 guys in Game 6 in their starting lineup. Boston's smaller than that, especially without Porzingis. Boston's trouble spots, if you're the Cavs, are going to come from the wing in Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. So you're not going to have as much to contend with underneath, again, without Porzingis there, and he's more of a perimeter guy anyway. But you're going to really have to, find a way to buckle down and lock these guys down on the wing and make Brown and Tatum, who are going to get their points. You just got to make them work like crazy to get those points and irritate them, and hope that Derek White or Drew Holiday or some of these other guys, Al Horfords of the world, don't go off, because that's going to be a big ask to overtake a team that's got 4 guys going off at the same time.
Sam Amico, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Sam.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me, and we will talk to you soon.
Sam Amico, make sure you check him out. Everything NBA, especially the Cavs, hoopswire.com. We'll step aside, take a quick time out. Ashley Bastock, Browns beat reporter from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. On the other side of the break, Sports4CLE will continue. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program is dedicated to recognizing exceptional students, teachers, and schools throughout Ohio. Scan the QR code on screen to nominate students and teachers as Academic All-Stars and Teachers of the Month. They must be currently enrolled or teach in grades K through 12. Is your K through 12 school developing students' literacy skills to achieve success in reading? If so, you can nominate your school for the School of the Year. Students can win $100, teachers can win $500, and schools can win $2,500. Scan the QR code, fill out the forms, and nominate deserving students, teachers, and schools today. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program takes pride in honoring exceptional students, teachers, and schools across Ohio. Submit your nomination today. It's fun, fast, and free. Sports4CLE continues. Former NFL offensive lineman Brian Baldinger took a look, analyzes some film on the Browns' second-round draft choice, defensive tackle Michael Hall Jr.
51 from Ohio State is Michael Hall Jr. He was the Browns' first pick in the second round. And you watch this push right here. Can you imagine when you have the MVP, Myles Garrett, and Za coming around the corner, you get this kind of push? Like, you just watch him. This guy, you watch what he does to Joe Alt right here. Watch this swim right here on Joe Alt. Bam! Joe Alt's down on the ground. Like, his quickness, take on the guard, get off the block. Like, he's got an elite skill set. You watch him now, and I'm saying just watch out for your ear hole. Because when he's coming to blow you up. Like, you put him and Dalvin and Za'Darius and Myles on this front, I mean, this is going to be a wicked defensive line. Like, this is just old school shake and bake. Old school. Bah, 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 bah. See ya. Like, that wiggle and shake and get to the quarterback. He can beat you in a lot of different ways. There's that swim again. It's excellent. Now, get the ball carrier and just wrestle him down to the ground. Take him down for a 2-point takedown. Michael Hall Jr., I didn't hear a lot of people talking about him. Throughout the draft process, that's a good football player.
With that, let's welcome in Ashley Bastock, Browns beat reporter for the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Ashley, it's always interesting. Brian Baldinger is a guy who played in the NFL. He knows what a good defensive tackle looks like.
Yeah, I always love his breakdowns for defensive or offensive linemen, quite honestly. I mean, you always learn so much. He did a great one on DeJuan Jones last year after the first Steelers game, and I do think I love this look at Mike Hall Jr. I think it perfectly captures what the Browns loved about him. And we know there were only a handful of guys that they were looking at that D tackle spot in this draft class that they really felt could come in, could fit into this Jim Schwartz defense, and could get after opposing quarterbacks. That's what their standard is. They want a guy who's going to be able to rush the passer. And for them, I think Mike Hall Jr. is like those sports cars that Jim Schwartz talks about wanting in the center of his D-line. He's going to be a 3-tech. He's not going to be a nose tackle. He's not going to sit there and just eat up blocks. And I think those clips really show it. He's got some really strong moves already. And I think it's important to remember, he's only 20 years old. He's got a long way to go in terms of his development. The Browns are going to be able to mold him like clay in terms of refining his moves, getting more tools in his arsenal. And I think I'm really curious, just based on what we've seen so far, how quickly that development is going to come in this defensive scheme, because I think it might be the perfect one for him.
Yeah, the other thing about being 20 is he's going to get bigger and stronger. I mean, think about, he's 20 years old. He hasn't, just by physical maturation, he will get bigger and stronger.
Yeah, I mean, you see a lot of guys come into the NFL and they're going to put on weight, especially defensive guys, especially D linemen, especially D tackles in particular. It just feels like it's a different league. I mean, obviously, literally, it's a different league. It's not college anymore. But when you hear rookies, every single year, they bring up something to the effect of, it's totally different to come in the NFL where all you have to worry about is football. All you have to worry about is doing your job. These guys are used to having to juggle a lot more, to still having to juggle school and meet all those responsibilities so that they, of course, can be eligible to play football. But the NFL, you just have more time to devote to that sort of stuff, to devote to your own personal development. And I think the guys that are successful are the ones who really take advantage of that extra time and put in the work that is required to take that next step.
This from PFF.com. One major draft takeaway from every NFL team for the Browns: they added depth at positions of need. Cleveland's draft didn't have the flashy name recognition of many other classes, but the team did well to add productive players where needed. When you look at the draft, it seemed to be, it made sense. I guess that's, when I looked at it, the draft picks they made sense in a long-term view.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the bigger takeaways I had from draft weekend was just how set this roster feels for the most part. at the top of the depth chart, there's not a lot of room. And I've written this. I think Mike Hall Jr. has a chance to play right away, right? I think was really good in college. I think they really like him. There's going to be some snaps there. Now, of course, they've also brought in Quentin Jefferson in free agency, but the Browns did lose Jordan Elliott, so his snaps are kind of up for grabs. And I do think, though, for the most part, you don't need Mike Hall Jr. to start right away. You don't need him to play a ton of snaps right away. Of course, Zach Zinter, their third-round pick, you don't need him to start right away. Barring injury, I think most of his reps in a perfect world would be practice reps during the 2024 season. A lot of these guys, I think, later in the draft, you're essentially taking a flyer on. Maybe a Nathaniel Watson could be great with these new kickoff rules in coverage as a rookie, but for the most part, you have time to sit, see how guys develop, let them get used to the NFL, and I think it's a good place for the Browns to be in, to not have to over-rely on a bunch of rookies very early, because there's always that learning curve, and I think this just goes to show the years that Andrew Berry and this front office now have put into molding the top of the roster the way they've wanted. So I agree they added depth, and I know the Browns don't like to think about things in terms of positions of need when it comes to the draft. For me personally, I thought they could have used some extra help at D tackle. I'm glad they went with that with their first pick, but it was all dependent on the guys that they really liked for this scheme. I think we saw them stick true to that. It's why they didn't end up making any trades on the day of the draft this year, which was an Andrew Berry first, but they're in a good spot right now, I think, with how this roster is constructed, and it showed on draft weekend.
I know you wrote an article about Justin Hardy. That's a young guy from Glenville coming home, really a special teams standout in his career. Take us through that article, what you found out, and tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, I think for me, the handful of big takeaways I've come out with are, number one, Justin Hardy might be coming home at the perfect time. A big part of it has to do with these new kickoff rules. The play will not begin until returners have the ball, and Justin Hardy is a Pro Bowl gunner. And for fans who might not be familiar with the terminology, the gunner on coverage teams is the guy who's just sprinting down the sideline trying to take a returner's head off, so to speak. So when you can't move as the gunner until the play starts, speed becomes very important. And that's something Justin Hardy has always had. And as you mentioned, Dave, he's from Glenville. He grew up 12 minutes away from Cleveland Browns Stadium. He said it was just a straight shot down St. Clair for him to get there. The stadium helped fuel his football dreams. And I think I also uncovered he's very close with all of the people here, his family, the Gins, of course, who have been instrumental in his football career. And Ted Ginn Jr. gave me a great quote that ended up being a headline of the story. Justin Hardy's somebody who's been taking on double teams his whole life, and talking to him and talking to others who know him, you start to realize this guy manufactured a career for himself despite never being the top option at any of his stops. And that included Glenville. He was trying to be a receiver or a cornerback, but at that time on those Glenville teams, he had to compete with guys like Marshawn Lattimore and Shane Wynn. He was never at the top of Ted Ginn Sr.'s depth chart, but he knew his speed was special. He kept encouraging him to look at this special teams role. He goes on to Illinois. He earns 3 degrees while he's there, all while dealing with the death of his mother. He signs as an undrafted free agent to the Houston Texans in 2017, and when they cut him, the Saints end up picking him up because he did so well in that preseason game on coverage going up against his old friend Ted Ginn Jr. So those guys got to play together in New Orleans for a couple of years, but overall, my big takeaway is he had to grind to get here. He, of course, became a Pro Bowler with the Jets. He recovered the onside kick in that infamous 2022 Jets win over the Browns that started their run. So he's going to play hard. I do think that double teams analogy is very appropriate for him, for his life, for how he's viewed his career. And I think he's going to be a great guy in this Browns locker room.
So let's look at this, and I know you've done this on the Orange and Brown podcast, Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Positions on the roster of the Browns you feel really good about, and the ones you're maybe less confident in.
Yeah, I think one of the position groups that I felt good about that I brought up is safety. I think that led to some interesting conversations for us. I just think This safety room is filled with veterans now. I think Grant Delpit was the most important guy. They got his extension done last year during the season. I personally like that they brought Rodney McLeod back. I know he's another year older. He's coming off a biceps injury, but he knows this Jim Schwartz defense, I think, better than anyone. And I think he adds a really key dynamic in that locker room. And also, the reason I said safety, and this, again, led to some interesting discussion for us, is because even though that room got beat up last year, Grant Delpit's season ended with the groin injury, Rodney McLeod, obviously, the bicep, Juan Thornhill didn't really produce the way he wanted because he dealt with a calf injury all year. The Browns still threw in 2 undrafted guys, an undrafted rookie in Ronnie Hickman and an undrafted second-year guy in D'Anthony Bell, and those guys played well and produced for the most part. So for me, I think that room is in a pretty good spot. That was my nomination. And then the other one, I think that led to some really interesting conversation, because when you're talking about what you're unsure of, obviously quarterback is a big question, largely because of DeShaun Watson's injury. But I think it was interesting to talk about edge rusher as almost being an unsure of position. You could argue it's a position group that, hey, the Browns should be pretty content with, fans should be pretty content with, but I think it could also fall on the side of being unsure about it, because they haven't really gone out and added another big name double-digit sacker there. And for the most part, we're seeing them run it back on this D-line. They've obviously had a few additions like Mike Hall, like Quentin Jefferson on the inside. But I do think there is some element of risk to that in the NFL. Teams have a lot more film on this defense now. I think it's only going to get harder for Myles Garrett coming off a Defensive Player of the Year award there. So my argument was I would have liked to see them go after another big name. Maybe they will. Never say never, I guess. We know they traded for Zadarius Smith on a Friday in May last year. But I just think getting after the quarterback has to be paramount, and I'm really curious to see who is going to break out alongside Myles Garrett this year. I think Zadarius Smith has a chance. It's great they brought him back. Obo Okoronkwo, of course, was still under contract, and he was hampered by an injury of his own, a pec injury by the end of the year that I think slowed him down. But this edge rusher group is really interesting to me. But again, like the draft, I think these points all just kind of show this roster is in a pretty good spot compared to most teams.
Ashley Bastock, Browns beat reporter for the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com, and I are going to step aside, take one more time out. Other side of the break, how the AI, artificial intelligence, predicts the AFC North. Straight ahead on Sports4CLE. Stay with us.
Play Maximum Millions and $2 million Ultimate Cash from the Ohio Lottery, and you may never look at scratch-offs the same way again.
We continue talking Browns with Ashley Bastock, Browns beat reporter from Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. This is a tweet from the 33rd team. It's how AI, artificial intelligence, predicts the AFC North this year. They have the Browns winning it at 11-6, Steelers finishing second at 10-7, Ravens 9-8. They have the Bengals at 6-11. Again, that's a computer simulation AI prediction. And Ashley, I'm not quite sure how they get 6-11 from the Bengals, but all right, if the Browns win the AFC North, I'm in.
Somebody could probably make a lot of money figuring out how to build an AI program designed specifically to account for all the weirdness and just how competitive AFC North football is. I think there's really, to me, in my mind, no rhyme or reason to those records, and I am curious again. I think it just kind of goes to show, couldn't you make an argument for the Bengals being the 11-6 team if you had to, right? I mean, who knows what's going to happen in this division? We, of course, don't have the schedules yet. I think that's a big part of it. My first gut instinct is, I mean, I could see the Browns winning 11 games this year. I could also see them winning way less. I think it's important to remember they're playing a second-place schedule for the first time in a long time. They're going to have some really good quarterbacks to go up against, including Pat Mahomes. including, now the Steelers have totally rehauled their quarterback room as well. Perhaps they'll see Justin Fields, or obviously Russell Wilson is the other option. So I am curious. I think the AFC North is as unpredictable as ever, but maybe someone can make an AI model that accurately depicts that part of the conference.
They seem to be doing it with everything else. But yeah, you could make a case any of those 4 teams win the division and any of the 4 of them finish last. This from Dog Pound Daily. 3 players on the roster bubble the Browns could trade for, so other teams' roster bubbles. 3 they go. Kendall Lamb, offensive tackle for the Dolphins. 19 games, 3 starts, 2019-2020 season with the Browns. Drake Jackson, edge rusher for the 49ers. Entering year 3, 21 tackles, 6 sacks on his resume. And number 1, Peyton Hendershot, tight end for the Cowboys, former undrafted free agent out of Indiana. 11 receptions, a couple of touchdowns as a rookie in 2022. Missed time last year because of an injury. I don't see them signing another tackle. Hendershot's interesting. I think if they go and get another tight end, they want a veteran, though.
Yeah, I think that's true, too, because you look at that room right now, and I guess the number 2 behind David Njoku, there's a lot in flux there. You have Jordan Akins coming back, but Harrison Bryant was that true number 2. Jordan Akins didn't do a whole lot last year for them. So I'll be curious to see if he has an expanded role, especially in the pass game with DeShaun Watson. Those 2 guys go way back. They played together with the Texans. So I wouldn't be surprised in theory to see them add there, but I also think it's important to know how the Browns feel about these positions. They are really happy with their pass catching core right now. I understand, and I have some hesitancy personally, because if David Njoku gets hurt and is out for an extended period of time, I don't really know what you do there, but I don't know how much capital they'd be willing to give up to add at any of those spots at this point. And I agree with you on tackle, Dave. I think right now the Browns have the opposite problem. They have 3 starting offensive tackles. I think the only way I could see them trading in for a veteran or something would be if multiple of those guys who had season-ending injuries, which are Jed Wills, Jack Conklin, DeJuan Jones, if there were multiple roadblocks to their rehab. But from what we know right now, it sounds like they might all be on different timelines, but everyone continues to progress well from their respective knee injuries that they suffered in 2023. And I think I've been writing about this since the Combine. It might be a good problem to have for the Browns that you have 3 starting offensive tackles, but maybe we would see them trade one of those guys away as opposed to bringing somebody else in if everybody's healthy.
All right, before I let you go, I know you've done this on the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. So the assets for the DeShaun Watson, we know what they were. How do you view the trade now?
I think it's really hard to view this trade definitively still. And I talked about this after the draft. I think there's a lot of people who want to fall on the side of the Browns have absolutely lost this trade. And I don't think you can do that. I think there's no way right now. You look at what the Texans have done with those picks. I think getting Will Anderson and getting Tank Dell alone makes this deal a win for Houston, because you also have to figure out the fact DeShaun Watson was never playing another game there regardless. This is not like the Browns manufactured a deal out of thin air. Houston was going to move on. So I think the picks they got, they allowed them to get some, hopefully for them, cornerstone players on both sides of the ball for them for the next decade or so. And I do think even though that is true, even though Houston can't lose the trade, the Browns can still make the trade a win for them as well. This isn't a somebody has to win, somebody has to lose the trade scenario. If the Browns go and win a Super Bowl next year, I think everyone will consider that a successful trade. Now, I do think if DeShaun Watson struggles and they don't win and it's very clear, hey, we're in year 3 of this and we haven't gotten out of it what we wanted, then yeah, the trade didn't work for them. But I think with his injury last year, with the suspension the year before, you still can't look at this and say the Browns made a bad deal, they got fleeced. I know I saw that terminology being used on Twitter. I don't think that's entirely accurate yet. I do still think this can be a win for the Browns if DeShaun Watson comes out and helps this team get to a Super Bowl. I do think that's the standard, but there's still time for them to meet it.
Yeah, look at all the teams that have done crazy stuff trying to get quarterbacks last year as well. So it shows you it's the hardest position in all of sport to find one, and that's why the Browns did what they did. Ashley Bastock, is always great stuff. Thanks so much for the time and the insight. Appreciate it, Ashley.
Thank you.
Ashley Bastock, make sure you check her out, plaindealer and cleveland.com. Really good Browns coverage. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. Guardians recall Kyle Manzardo. We'll get a scouting report on him, what he does well, what he has been doing at AAA. Voice of the Clippers, Ryan Mitchell, joins us to talk about guys working their way to Cleveland with the Guardians. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to Go Forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We turn our attention to the Guardians, one of the best teams in the American League, one of the best records in baseball as well. Some bad news. Steven Kwan injured that hamstring over the weekend. He has been put on the injured list. That means Kyle Manzardo will be brought up, a guy that was tearing it up in the minor leagues. Let's welcome in Ryan Mitchell. He is the voice of the Columbus Clippers. Ryan, appreciate the time. What have you seen from Kyle Manzardo? 303 batting average, 9 home runs, which is more power than we might have thought, and 20 runs batted in just over 100 at-bats.
Yeah, he's been very good, kind of as expected with what happened toward the end of last year, right? He came over in the Aaron Cavaliers trade. He was injured at the time, finally got healthy and got onto the Clippers roster, and after taking some time, as one would expect, to get back into the swing of things, hit well toward the end of last season. He carried that into the Arizona Fall League and had a great spring training for the Guardians as well. And what he showed to begin this year, it was actually a slow start. The weather was terrible. But after about the first 10 or 11 games, he started to lock in, kind of going the opposite way for base hits, and then the power started to bloom. He's been very clutch, really, for the Clippers this year. Big hits in big times, and showing big power to all fields. He's not just pull-side power. He can go to the opposite field and hit it over the wall as well. So that obviously is something the Guardians have been looking for. He doesn't play the corner outfield, which would be kind of the ideal situation there with Cleveland. But you know, he's a first baseman and kind of limited to first base defensively. And he's made pretty good strides this year with the glove and around the bag. So he's not going to hurt the team on defense, and he's going to hit. At least he has this year. The numbers against lefties are fine. He's obviously got splits that say he hits right-handers better, but he's got a pretty good approach against left-handed pitching, doesn't look overwhelmed. He has a very good idea about what he wants to do in the strike zone, goes out of the strike zone very rarely, and teams have tried to mix up their approach to him, and he does a really nice job during at-bats, kind of making adjustments while not varying from his plan. So that's good to see.
Yeah, and you know, to your point about not striking out, 109 at-bats, just 22 strikeouts, and has also drawn 15 walks. All right, another young guy, another outfielder, shown some power, Jonathan Rodriguez, 281, 6 homers, 21 runs batted in. What have you seen from him? He strikes out a little bit more probably than you'd want, but take us through Jonathan Rodriguez, what you've seen.
Yeah, so he does have more swing and miss, but it comes with great power potential. When he squares up a baseball, it tends to go pretty far and pretty fast. His average exit velocity is pretty good, and he knows the strike zone fairly well, but he will chase. Power hitters tend to do that, and so that's kind of the next step in his development. Still a relatively young guy, can play right field, can play left field, has an excellent arm in the outfield, so that's always something that's neat to see. And you know, you see there, he's got power to the opposite field as well, going to right there in Syracuse a couple of weeks ago. It was tough hitting conditions there for a lot of those days too. And Rodriguez has a good idea about where his power is, what pitches he can do damage on. And just as a young guy, teams sometimes approach him with breaking balls away that are too tempting. But, that's part of development. And, oh, by the way, what have the Cleveland Guardians been looking for? Corner outfielders with pop. He certainly fits that bill. He can run a little bit. He's not a speed demon. He's not going to steal a lot of bases. But in the outfield, he can go get it. So I think if his development continues along its trajectory that we have seen last year and this year, he can absolutely be a viable candidate to play Major League ball games and hit Major League home runs.
Yeah, and you mentioned a young guy. So the one thing the Guardians do, and they have done for years, they want to make sure that when somebody comes up to the big leagues, they're ready. And that's why they waited for an opportunity for Manzardo, and they want to make sure they get consistent at bats.
Yeah, certainly that's the case. I mean, you don't want to bring a guy up. You saw it with Jackson Holliday with the Baltimore Orioles. He came up and he had dominated, right? He had completely dominated International League pitching. We didn't get a chance to see him, but he looked ready. And that's one of the tough things because the chasm between AAA and the major leagues is so great. All the pitchers can hit their spots in the major leagues, and in AAA, guys are working on hitting their spots. And so there are a lot more mistake pitches to be had and to do damage against than there are in the major leagues. So you want a guy to be ready to go up, but you're never sure, right? I mean, obviously, Jackson Holliday, a top prospect in baseball, floundered and had to go back to AAA. He's going to go back to the major leagues. But the Guardians are like most other teams. They want to make sure that a guy is on paper and with the eyeball test ready to go up there and face the next challenge. Maybe you meet the challenge, maybe the challenge meets you, but you definitely don't want to send a guy up when he is unprepared if he's somebody that you think of as being a long-term part of your plans. And with Manzardo, one of the things that kind of kept him in spring training to begin with is he fills the same role as a Josh Naylor. Josh Naylor's not going anywhere, everybody hopes, right? So it's going to be a bit of a challenge with Quan going down. It's not a 1-for-1. You're not calling up an outfielder. So Stephen Vogt's going to have to figure out how to get those at-bats distributed because you don't want your number 2 prospect coming to the major leagues to sit. So obviously there's a plan in place to try and distribute those at-bats and those defensive innings, and they're going to try and make it work. So
another guy, a young guy who has been one of the top prospects in the minor leagues for a while, has not been able to stay healthy. George Valera, he comes back 3 for 11, hit a ball out of the park yesterday as well.
Yeah, George is one of those stories where you think, well, we've been hearing about this guy, so where is he? For several years, he's been one of the top prospects in the Guardians organization, one of the top prospects in baseball because of the tools that he brings to the table. He has power. He has speed. He can play all 3 outfield positions. He's got a plus arm in the outfield. But injuries have gotten in his way. He's been up with the Clippers in parts of each of the last 3 seasons, 42 games at the end of 2022. And then last year wound up playing 73 games, so just under half the season, but began the year on the injured list with off-season hand surgery. And then when he got healthy, played just a handful of games before he injured a hamstring. So that put him on the shelf for a few more weeks. So he only played half a AAA season. And then this year, injured himself early in spring training, a pretty significant hamstring strain. So he just got on the active roster this week while the Clippers were playing the Toledo Mud Hens. And his first game back, he reached 4 times. He had a couple of walks, he had a couple of hits, and then yesterday had a big swing of the bat for an opposite field home run. So you're getting a taste of what Valera can do. And the numbers really don't even look all that great as far as a top prospect over the course of the last few years. But you have to take that with a grain of salt because he's missed so much time. Every time you get back, it's like kind of starting fresh again. So you have to have that ramp-up period till you really hit your stride. Hopefully for George, the hamstring injury is in the past. He's going to get going and be, the guy that he wants to be. And then the Cleveland Guardians have hoped that he was going to be for the past several years.
Yeah, it's still a young guy, too. So I think he's 23, 24. Yes. So the other thing that take us through some of the pitchers. Who, the pitching staff is kind of always a work in progress. Who are some guys that are pitching well that could end up helping the Guardians, either in the bullpen or in the rotation?
Well, Anthony Gose is such an interesting story. He got to Cleveland as a pitcher after making it to the major leagues as an outfielder. Came up originally with Philly, then made it to the majors with Toronto and Detroit as an outfielder, and then just kind of plateaued there and tried to reinvent himself as a pitcher. And did so and got to the major leagues in that regard. It's an amazing story. And then missed all of last year as he succumbed to, as so many pitchers do, he went under the knife. And so he missed all of last year, and he's ramping himself back up. The fastball, again, is in the upper 90s, 97, 98, and he's got a slider to go with it. And left-handers that throw 98, even in this day of chasing velocity and spin rate, those don't just grow on trees. And he's had his ups and downs coming back and trying to get himself back to where he was in the majors, but I think he's, before the year's over, going to be a viable option for the Cleveland Guardians in the bullpen. Another guy out of the pen, Franco Aleman. He's huge, 6'6", and looks bigger than that. And he's got a fastball that can get to the upper 90s as well and good secondary stuff. But the fastball velocity has been kind of inconsistent at times. He pitched yesterday in the game for Columbus against Toledo and pitched angry. It was really good to see. He got some big strikeouts to get out of the 8th inning to set up those who closed it out for a Clippers win. So those are a couple of guys on the back end. Peter Strzelecki is up right now, and he's a guy that can certainly help. And then Wes Parsons are kind of stretching out a little bit. He's been very effective for Columbus. Parsons and Strzelecki were acquired, at the end of spring training, beginning of the season via trade, and Parsons has been very good in a long relief role. And what we know about the Cleveland Guardians system is there's not a lot of depth in terms of the starting rotation if there is a need at the major league level. Xavier Curry is obviously a guy they would call upon. He pitched very well against Boston, but Joey Cantillo is still out in Arizona trying to come back from his own hamstring injury. And, of course, Daniel Espino is lost for the season. So other guys are going to have to step up and if there is an opportunity, try and help out Cleveland.
Ryan Mitchell, voice of the Clippers, as always. Great stuff. Thanks so much for the time and the insight. Appreciate it very much, Ryan.
Of course, anytime.
Ryan Mitchell, he is the voice of the Columbus Clippers, giving us the information about Kyle Manzardo, who the Guardians called up, as well as some of the other prospects who could be called on to help the Guardians this season. That's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We will see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.